Okay, so we're back again. But what we want to do now is fix up the lighting on our cubes to actually cast shadows. Now we could go through each of these and apply the settings to each of these lights here, but that would take a really long time. And we've set it up with the Maya referencing system so that we can adjust this really easily. And also, if you notice, I've actually left in a whole heap of history here, which is really going to slow down the processing time once we start adding in dynamics. So we're going to go back and fix up those things. So I'm going to save this scene and go to File, Recent Files, and I'm going to go back to my original cube file. Now if I click this, you can see that I've still got all my history here, so I'm going to go Edit, Delete by Type, History. So that's all nice and neat now. And now if I go through my lights and I want to actually add in some shadows. Now it was all fine to have lights without shadows to start off with, but now when we're trying to make something that's a little more sophisticated, we want to start adding them in. So I'm going to just tick Use Ray Trace Shadows. We're going to be using Mental Ray later on, so we're actually going to turn these onto Ray Trace Shadows. We're going to put 12 shadow rays, and that should about do it. And we'll go through and change that for each of these. Okay, so they're all done. Our cube has been cleaned up as we've gotten rid of all that stuff there. So we're going to go ahead and click and go Control S to save, and then back to our cube scene file. And now you notice that once we click on one of these, all the history is gone and it is all much cleaner. And if you look at the lights, then they all have their shadows turned on as well. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of a render here, but of course because we have shadows turned on now, this will take quite a bit longer. But of course that didn't take very long at all because we're not actually using Mental Ray, which is what these shadows are designed for. So what we're going to be doing is, Mental Ray is not yet loaded in Maya, so we'll close this down and go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Plugin Manager. Now by default, Mental Ray is not turned on, so you have to go and turn it on manually. So if you scroll down here until you find Maya to MR, which is Maya to Mental Ray, and you click Loaded and Auto Load, and that will make sure that it will always be on in future files that you create. And so we're going to go Close. Okay, so now when we go back and render a scene, it will still use Maya software, but we now have this option of using Mental Ray. So we're going to try that again. Now as you can see here, we're not getting any of this glow underneath. It's still fairly poor quality around the edges, but that's just because we're still on a fairly low quality setting of render. We'll come back to that in a moment, but that's what we're going to be working with now. So we've got the lights set up, but what we're actually going to do first is you can see that there are these big reflections in each of these, and that's why we're getting these little corners of light, which is not exactly what we're looking for. So we're going to close this and save our scene and go back to our cube file. And if we bring open the Hypershade Perspective view again, and we go to our metal, we can turn down the reflectivity because at the moment it's at 0.5, and that is far higher than what we need. So we're probably going to take that to 0.1. And we'll get the plastic and we'll go to 0. Because there's so much light on it, it's not going to be that much of a reflective surface anyway. And just for the point of this exercise, we need to cut down on our render time. So we're going to leave it at 0. So if we save that Go back to File, and then our cube scene. And then we make another render. Okay, so you notice that the really stark edges are gone. You don't have any of this weird reflectivity going on in there either. This is what our lighting is going to start off like in this scene, but we're going to have a look at how to make it a little more sophisticated. So we're going to click on this button here, which is Open Render Settings window, which is also in this corner here if you don't have the render view open. So we're just going to click on that. And it brings up all these options about rendering. Now the common stuff we're not going to look at just at this stage, we'll get to that later on. We want to go to the quality. And at the moment the quality preset is at draft, and that's why we're getting these jagged sort of edges. That's because of the anti-aliasing. So if we just crank that up to, we'll put it on production and just show you what the render difference is like. So what you can do is this button here will save the image, and then I can render a new one. Okay, so we're done, and you can see now that that is a much clearer render than what we had going on earlier. The only difference is this one took 15 seconds to create, and this one took 1:34. So while you're doing preview renders like this, you really want to be working at this preview setting, even if you do get these jagged edges, because it will just increase your workflow tenfold. So what we're going to do is bring this back to draft so that we get our fast renders back, and we're going to actually start looking at putting in a more sophisticated lighting setup, which we'll do with using the indirect lighting, which we'll get to in the next tutorial.